want to start off with a question, and you've probably already had this question in the back of your mind, but I'm going to ask it directly, which is, what should responsible AI scientists do? Right, given the training and skills we've got, what should we do with them? Right, and for those of you who don't know me, I've been thinking about this question for 20 years, trying to make the most positive impact that I possibly can given my limited time on Earth, so let me tell you about some of it. All right, so I spent the first 3 years of my professional life trying to predict manhole fires and manhole explosions in New York City. These fires and explosions happen because there are underground electrical cables going underneath all the streets and avenues in New York City, and some of them date back from the time of Thomas Edison. And sometimes the insulation breaks down on those electrical cables, and there's a short circuit, and then the insulation catches fire, which sometimes leads to something very unpleasant and dangerous. And then a few years after that, I met some police detectives, and I started working with them. And our goal was to find crime series, which are clusters of crimes committed by the same people. And it turned out to be a really interesting math problem. It was a subspace clustering problem. And we designed an algorithm called Series Finder, which finds these crime series. And I'm showing you a cluster of crimes we found in Cambridge, Massachusetts, consisting of 10 housebreaks that the algorithm discovered. And the Cambridge Police Department did not know about this cluster beforehand. I mean, they knew about the crimes, but they didn't know that they were actually connected, like the same group committed these things. And this diagram kind of shows you how they're connected to each other, and then here they are on the map. And Series Finder's code is public, and it's been used since 2016 in the New York Police Department's patternizer algorithm that determines whether a new crime is connected to past crimes. And then still over a decade now, I started working with Brandon Westover's team at Massachusetts General Hospital. And we designed the only AI model that is currently used in critical care brain monitoring. And it predicts seizure risk in ICU patients from EEG measurements. And I have a picture of a person here connected to the EEG. And this model is called the 2 helps 2B score, which is quite interpretable. And in fact, it's so small that I can fit it on a PowerPoint slide, so it's actually right there. That's the whole machine learning model, this thing. That's the machine learning model that's used in hospitals now. And you can find it on websites that list common medical scoring systems. And I did all this work over 10 years ago. And these projects helped shape what I view as responsible AI. Now, okay, so I've told you what I've done over a decade ago, and I'm just putting up a list of some projects that I've worked on within the last decade. Many of them I am still working on. And since I can't talk about all of them, despite how much I love them all and all the stories behind them, so what I'm going to do is pick a couple of projects to talk about and help them and use them to kind of refine the answer to the question that I posed earlier, which is, I said I would talk about what I think responsible AI scientists should do. I think they should improve people's lives, and not just sort of like make YouTube videos a little bit better to view, like actually really improve people's lives when they need them, particularly for people who weren't as lucky as all of us were. And so I'm going to give you one example on this, which is analyzing interventions and showing you how I think this should be done. And this helps to inform policies, because if you can understand whether an intervention works or how well it works, then you can change funding and resources based on that knowledge. Now, I think responsible AI scientists should at least make some attempt to save lives, even though that is really difficult if you're not like working directly with patients, right? If you're an AI scientist, how can you save lives, right? And I think we should try. And so I'm going to talk about an application to predicting cancer. And then I'm going to talk about what I think is the next frontier, which is protecting people. You say, well, protecting people from what? And the answer is AI. And other AI scientists. But we'll get to that later. So let's just start with this question about policy. All right, so I'm going to talk about the evaluating the effectiveness of pretrial programs in the criminal justice system. But the machine learning techniques that I'm going to talk about is general. And I want to highlight here the contributions of Travis and Saksham, who are the lead authors on this paper, as well as my colleagues Brandon Garrett from the law school, Sudeepa Roy and Alex Volfovsky from computer science and statistics, as well as Brandon's colleagues Courtney Lee, Caroline Levinson, and Swathi Ramprasad. All right, so pretrial is the period of time in a criminal case that starts after you're charged with a crime, but before your trial occurs or your case is disposed. Now, during the pretrial stage, people may either spend that time in jail, or they might be released back into the community. Okay, and there's also a third option. There's a third option, which is you might be released back into the community, but required to take part in a supervision program. Now, today I would like to talk about which of these is best, right? Particularly for low-risk individuals. So these are people charged with misdemeanors or nonviolent felonies. Now, the first option is detaining low-risk people in jail. Now, the problem with that is that pretrial detention has criminogenic effects. Compared to those who face similar charges, have similar case histories, and are released, people detained pretrial are more likely to miss crucial court appointments in the future, be convicted in the future, or receive harsh sentences in the future. So this is not a good option. So if we remove that option, then we're left with a choice, right? Supervision or not. Okay, so what is this supervision? So it's a pretrial community supervision program. And these kinds of programs vary, but they typically provide access to education, housing, employment, and healthcare. And then in return, they might require people to have periodic check-ins with a case manager, do drug testing, wearing an electronic monitor, taking part in therapy, okay? These programs aim to get people out of jail while they await trial, and they succeed in doing that. But they also aim to reduce new criminal activity and failures to appear in court. And some studies find that they do, and some find that they don't. But these studies are very sloppy. So there was a review paper by Kristen Bechtel, and she stated that most of these studies are really low quality. Like a bunch of them are not even, they're just like descriptive, and there's nothing quantitative at all. There's like, I observed this thing. Like there's no numbers at all. And a lot of them are not even peer reviewed. So the question remained, like, are these pretrial supervision programs helpful, harmful, or a waste of time and taxpayer money? And more generally, how do you figure that out? All right, so ideally you would conduct a randomized control trial where you would assign some of the people randomly to treatment and some of them randomly to control groups, right? So that the treated people go to the program and the control people don't, and then you just compare the outcomes of the two groups to figure out whether the program was effective. But that's not possible here because the judges don't assign people randomly to these programs, right? As much as we scientists would like it to be that way, it's just not the way the world works. So what we do is we switch to observational causal inference. So here we try to mimic a randomized control trial by matching people up who are similar to each other. But in each matched group, some people had the treatment and some of them didn't. Okay, and then we look at who recidivated and look at who didn't to figure out whether the treatment program had an effect. Okay, so we have to match people up. How do we do it? All right, so let's talk a bit about why matching is not as easy as it looked on the previous slide. So it's because you don't get exact matches in databases, right? There's no identical twins in the data set. So let's do an example. So let's say this is the first individual in the database. So this is a Black male, so we're working on it with a pretrial program in Durham. Most of the people who are in that program are Black males. So this is a Black male who's charged with a Class H felony. They have lived at their residence more than a year. They are a veteran. They have at least 5 prior adult convictions. They are not 18 to 20 years old, and their VPRE score, which is a risk score, is 4. Okay, so there are no identical twins in the database, so it's not clear who to match him to. So this might be a reasonable match, but it's not really clear that we should be matching males and females. Or I could try to match him to this male over here, but they have very different numbers of past convictions. This person has at least 5, this one doesn't. This one's, older than 20, and this one's 18 to 20. So what we have to do is figure out which variables are important to match on and really try to match on those. And those variables are the ones that are most useful in predicting the outcome. So for instance, if we had a variable up here that was like toenail length, okay? Like we don't really care about matching on that because it's not relevant to outcomes in this case, right? So in the criminal justice world though, they typically do not do matching very well, okay? And they basically use a technique called propensity score matching, which just gives up on the problem that I'm trying to explain to you. So propensity score matching, and also its classic alternative, prognostic score matching, this is the way everybody does this. And these are matching techniques, but their matches are not anything like the matches that I showed you on the previous slide. So both techniques have the same issue, which is they take some complicated formula of the variables, and they just calculate that for each person, and then they make matches based on the nearest neighbors. Okay? So they're not matching on the variables, they're matching on some combination, complicated combination of the variables. And so the individuals, the matches don't make any sense because the people who are matched can be very far apart in the original variables. So the matches are not interpretable. And the matches are really difficult to understand or check or troubleshoot because they're really low quality. And uninterpretable matches sort of defeats the whole point of matching in the first place, if you ask me. And on top of it, the results are just not very accurate from using these approaches. And the treatment effects are just off. So we had to fix this. So over 8 years ago, when I came to Duke, Alex Walfowski, Sudeepa Roy, and I founded the Almost Matching Exactly Lab for the sole purpose of designing algorithms that construct high-quality match groups so that we can actually do causal analysis on complex observational data. And we have essentially 3 pieces of software. We have the FlameDame software, we have Maltz, and LCM, and they work for different types of data. And I'm going to be showing you results from FlameDame today. All of these algorithms use the same general framework, so I want to explain to you that framework, okay? So first, I'm going to block off part of this diagram so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So we take the data, and we reserve part of it as a training set for machine learning, okay? And then we train an algorithm on this data and use that to figure out which variables are important for predicting the outcome. And those variables are the ones that are important to match on. And that determines the distance metric for matching. That determines how we're going to match people. It's on those important variables. And then once we know how to match, we have our learn distance metric, we can use that on the rest of the data. So the rest of the data is called the estimation set because we're going to estimate treatment effects on that data. And we use the learn distance metric on the estimation set to find the nearest neighbors for each treatment point. And that creates the match groups. And they do look like the ones that I showed you on that slide earlier. They do kind of look like identical twins. Okay, it gives you really nice interpretable match groups. It allows you to troubleshoot them more easily. They're matched on important variables, just so you can see what's going on. And the different algorithms, by the way, they learn different types of distance metrics. And then from there, once you have the match groups, you can estimate the treatment effects by comparing the outcomes in each of the match groups. Okay, so now that I've explained the method, let's talk about how it can help our analysis of the pretrial data. So our goal was to evaluate a pretrial program that's run by the Criminal Justice Resource Center, so the CJRC, in Durham. And our research question was, did the CJRC program reduce new criminal charges? So the treatment is you attend the program, control, you're just released into the community, no supervision. Now the CJRC, as far as we can tell, is just a completely typical pretrial program. It offers services, and in exchange, it has the standard requirements that I discussed earlier. So it's just a typical pretrial program. Okay, we merged 3 data sets for this study. We received data from the CJRC, which has demographic, employment, and criminal history information. We merged this data with data from the Durham County Jail to determine bond conditions and confirm pretrial release. And then we merged this data contained in a statewide conviction database called ACIS. And this database contains case outcome and sentencing data, and also data on new criminal charges. And obviously this merging was quite complicated, and Travis did an amazing job with it. It was a lot of work. Okay, so this is the number of people that were recommended for the pretrial program, and so we have 1,415 people. 687 took part in the program. These were the treated people. 728 were released back into the community without supervision. These are the controls. Now, most of the people were Black, male, and they were 17 to 30 years old, and the most common charge was an assaultive misdemeanor. Okay, so if we use propensity score matching, then it says there's no treatment effect, like the treatment doesn't do anything. So that the program doesn't do anything, that's what it says. And the confidence interval overlaps 0. It's a tiny little treatment effect, and confidence interval overlaps 0, so no. So, but it's hard to believe what propensity score matching says, because again, the matches are not interpretable and the quality of the matching is low. So I just want to show you one of the match groups from propensity score matching so you can see the problem. Okay, and that the match group that I'm going to show you, it's part of that calculation that gives you that number. All right, so this is the match group for unit 924. Provided by propensity score matching. This is a Black male who had a class HRI felony, lived over a year at their residence, not a veteran, 0 to 5 prior convictions, 18 to 20 years old, and a VPRE score of 3. Okay, class HRI felony, it's like a low-level felony. It's like larceny, embezzlement, or forgery. And then this is the match group for person 924. I'm going to zoom in on it in a second so you can see it, but anywhere there's red, it means that the feature does not match. It doesn't match Unit 924's feature. And so, even though they're in the same match group, they don't match. Okay, so let me zoom in and just show you that. So this is 4 of the people who are, like, here. So here's the unit here. This is our unit, a Black male, and 4 of the people matched to him are women. And 3 of them have misdemeanors rather than felonies. Most of them are older. 1 is over 40, and some of them have very different risk scores over here. Some of them, like here's a VPRE score of 7. So these differ in a lot of important variables. So this is what I would consider like an uncohesive match group, right? So I really wouldn't trust this match group. So I'm going to show you now a result from the Dame Flame algorithm on the same unit. So this is the same person, same data set. The only difference is a new algorithm, right? This is our algorithm in the match group it found. And here, everyone in the match group was a Black male with an HRI felony that lived in their residence for over a year with a small criminal history and a low VPRE score. And the only difference here was age. And so, it's just a much higher quality match group coming out of Dame Flame, right? And like I said, the only thing that changed here was the algorithm. Same data set, same everything, only the algorithm changed. And it just gives you much better match groups so that you can trust them and troubleshoot them. Okay, so let me show you the result from Dame Flame. So Dame Flame says that the estimated treatment effect is tiny with confidence interval overlapping 0. So in other words, the pretrial program had no significant effect on new criminal charges. So the result is the same as propensity score, but now we actually believe it, okay? And this result is important because these programs are what we as a society are depending on to reduce new criminal activity and give these people a better future. But look, we should spend taxpayer money on things that work, not things that don't work. Right, now we have evidence to believe that this program and maybe many other programs like this don't actually work. So we should really consider alternative strategies to reduce new criminal activity, okay? Because the one that we're using may just not be a good use of taxpayer money and professional effort. And the reason we were able to figure all this out is because we have these almost matching exactly methods. Okay, they are quite useful in evaluating pretrial programs, and they're useful in evaluating many other types of programs where random assignment is not possible, ethical, or feasible. It's just a really nice way to get results that we can audit and trust about the quality of all of these programs. So I talked about measuring the effects of social programs to inform policymakers to help them try to improve lives. So I want to switch now to trying to save lives. And I'm going to talk about breast cancer. So for those of you who know me, you know that I really don't like black box models very much. Many years ago, we invented our own interpretable neural networks. And I was telling my friend Regina Barzilai about them, and she said, well, your interpretable neural networks won't solve my problem. She said, for my problem, you still need a black box. And I said, Regina, what's your problem? And she said, well, I want to predict breast cancer from mammograms up to 5 years in advance. And, this is before the patient has any cancer. This is before the patient has a visible breast lesion, okay? And this to me was quite amazing that anyone could do this. And indeed, she has a paper in Radiology where she does exactly this, okay? So she has an algorithm, it's called Mirai, or a model, it's called Mirai, and it predicts breast cancer up to 5 years in advance. And it was trained on 44,000 exams. And it's surprisingly accurate, okay? So shockingly accurate, if you ask me. So here are the AUCs right there. You want to read this keeping in mind that random guessing is 0.5 and perfect is 1, okay? So these are way better than random guessing. But Regina says her model's a complete black box, and nobody knows what it's doing. Even the doctors don't know what it's doing. And this is a task, by the way, that radiologists don't do, right? Radiologists do not predict breast cancer in advance. When you go in, they detect whether you have breast cancer, but they don't predict it in advance. And I thought, oh man, this is a bad one, right? Even Regina, who is a super smart AI researcher and a breast cancer survivor and the creator of this powerful model, along with her student Adam Yala, right? And they didn't figure this one out. Should we even try this? And so I immediately recognized why what she was doing is valuable, because breast cancer is very common, it's completely deadly, and there's a huge amount of data because women over 40 get mammograms at least once a year. Okay, so if you can predict it in advance, this could be a really huge change in healthcare for women. It would save many lives, okay? So there's been tons and tons of data generated over decades, and yet there's not a single risk prediction tool that's been approved by the FDA, machine learning or not, for predicting longer-term risk from breast cancer, okay? From mammograms. All right, radiologists don't do this, so the fact that their method, Mirai, was able to do this was amazing. And no one knew how it worked. It was just a complete black box. And it was designed in a way that's completely impenetrable. Okay, so this is a diagram from Regina's paper, and it just shows you how her AI model is constructed. And the first part of it's convolutional, and that part's fine. That's like, scanning the mammogram to find something dangerous, okay? So that's fine, just detect stuff. Now the second part is a transformer. And transformers are what ChatGPT is made of. They're a total mess. It's like they take the data, put it into a blender, and churn it up into a smoothie. You just can't disentangle where any of the information comes from with that. So Mirai is totally impenetrable. It just takes the whole mammogram, all 4 images of it, and it just detects stuff, churn whatever it detects into dog food, and then spits out a number that tells you the risk for the person to develop breast cancer. Okay. But you can't really do anything with this number because you can't understand where it came from. And, what was it in the mammogram that made this model say that this person is going to get, that this is a completely healthy person? What in the mammogram made you think that this person's going to get breast cancer in 5 years? Like, what was it? Okay. So I told my team to start investigating, but we ran into some trouble. So when you get a mammogram, there are 4 images taken, 2 of the right side, 2 of the left side. Mirai takes all 4 images as input, and it produces a magical risk score from these images with the black box that nobody understood, okay? But we unfortunately couldn't even investigate Mirai because we didn't have very good data, right? Regina, there's almost no public data on mammograms, right? Regina had 44,000 exams from Massachusetts General Hospital that she could train her algorithm on. We didn't have access to that. We had only a small public data set called InBreast, and it had a lot of mastectomy patients. Now, mastectomy patients only have 1 breast, so we only had 2 images. We couldn't even send the images into Mirai, right? So we said, how are we going to even investigate this if we just can't even send anything into the algorithm? So my team was thinking about this. I said, okay. We thought, fine, we'll just replicate the left side to the right side, or whichever side's missing, we'll just replicate it with the other side. There's nothing inherently different about the right breast as compared to the left breast, so It would be fine to just replicate it and send it into Mirai, right? Mirai won't know the difference. But Mirai did know the difference. And what happened was that we did this flipping of one side to the other side. When we did that, all the risk scores became really low. So here, this is the Mirai score for 120 patients in the in-breast data set that have both sides. And you can see there's a range of values. But then when we mirrored the left side to the right side, then all the Mirai scores went down to 0.2. And some of these images actually had visible breast lesions in them. Okay, so these were not low-risk patients, okay? These were high-risk patients. So, but when we mirrored the lesions, the risks in Mirai went down very low, okay? So we thought, whoa, symmetry. Okay, so symmetry's got to be the key to this whole thing, right? I mean, if Mirai can't tell that a mammogram with a visible lesion in it is high risk when you replicate it to the other side, then this model has got to be using symmetry, okay? So we had a conversation with our radiologists, and they told us that indeed, when they're looking at mammograms, they do kind of go back and forth between the two sides to see what's normal and what's not. But that asymmetry is something radiologists look at to verify that cancer exists. They don't use it to predict cancer in the future. So now we know that there are these broader asymmetries that we can use to predict cancer in the future even when there's no visible lesion, okay? So it's a subtle signal in these mammograms that radiologists did not know about. So we thought, okay, algorithm wants to use symmetry. We'll set it up so all it gets to use is symmetry. So what we did was we kept Mirai's convolutional layers, and we just ditched the super black box transformer, and in its place we put something much simpler, which was a symmetry detector. So it's literally a comparison between the left and the right sides. We just literally find where things are the most asymmetric, and we called our model Asym Mirai, okay? So let me zoom in on this. So it just compares the right sides of the CC view and the MLO view. It finds where they are the most different in both views, and then it just calculates how different those two spots are in the latent space. That gives you two numbers. You average those two numbers to get one number, and that's your risk score. Okay? So that's it. No black box transformer. Just summarize using the convolutional layers. Find the area with the highest asymmetry. Compare the left and the right sides. Average the two numbers instead of running a transformer. So, much simpler. And it could actually be actionable because it's telling you exactly where on the breast the asymmetry is. And this much simpler thing actually performs almost as well as Mirai. Not 100% as well, but very close, and it would perform better if we actually had a data set to train it on. Like they had. They trained their convolutional layers. We just used theirs. Okay, so in terms of performance, they're actually really quite similar. These are ROC curves, so the best performance is up in this corner near the sun, so up and over, that's best. And essentially the important thing you should see here is that Asym Mirai's performance is very similar to Mirai's performance, right? And that's the cool thing because it's so much more interpretable, right? It's not only can it tell you that there's a risk, it can tell you exactly why, right? It can point to where on the two sides the asymmetry is. So, like I said, Mirai just gives you a risk, just a number, that's it. Asym Mirai tells you that one, it found an asymmetry, which is why you're higher risk, and two, where that asymmetry is. All right, and because we know what Asym Mirai is doing, we can figure out when it's confounded and when it's not. Okay, so here's a case where Asym Mirai said that this was somewhat risky, but if you look at what it's doing, you can't trust it because the patient had an implant on one side that's messing up the risk score. It's messing up the symmetry. Right? Mirai probably messed this one up too, but you wouldn't know that. And you wouldn't be able to check it. And then here's another case where Asym Mirai says high risk, and there's an implant on one side, but Asym Mirai was not fooled. Right? It's actually not confounded, and you can see that because it's looking at this spot over here where it's found an asymmetry, not looking over here. And then here's a case where the images are misaligned, and Asym Mirai gave it a moderate risk score. Mirai gave it a high risk score. You shouldn't believe it, and now we know why. And then here's a case where the patient had pronounced lymph nodes, So if you didn't know what it was doing, you might think it was looking at those, but it wasn't fooled by that at all. In fact, it was looking at something much more concerning over here. Now, one really interesting thing that we found is that location consistency matters. So if the location of the box, which is your maximum asymmetry box, if it's in the same place every year, you might be special. Because if you're low risk every year, and the location of this window stays exactly where it is, then you might be in a very low risk group. And we're looking at this now in a more detailed way because these patients, it might mean that they could potentially get mammograms less often, without compromising their safety. All right, and this is the aSYMMERI paper. It was published in Radiology, and I'd like to acknowledge the work of my wonderful collaborators, John Donnelly, Luke Moffett, Alina Barnett, Fidesz Schwartz, and Joseph Lowe. And I'm very hopeful about this result because breast cancer is a leading cause of death in women. There are hundreds of thousands of cases diagnosed in the USA each year, and being able to predict it in advance in a way that's actionable could be totally game-changing. All right, so I've given you some examples of how AI scientists can try to improve lives and save lives. And let's switch to the last topic, which is protecting people. And as I told you, this is from AI, okay? So I want to start with the issue of black boxes, which is my home turf. And I wrote a paper about why explaining black boxes is not a good idea for high-stakes decisions. And I showed many examples and reasons why this is true, and importantly, because there's not a trade-off between accuracy and interpretability for high-stakes domains like medical risk scores and criminal justice risk scores, right? We don't really need black boxes for those domains because we don't get any performance benefit from black boxes, and they're much harder to troubleshoot and use. So I want to give an example that is not in this paper because I wrote this paper in 2019, and I want to talk about an example that I only learned about a few years ago. Okay, so this paper here, is on the topic of in vitro fertilization. And the paper was evaluating a model for predicting successful embryo implantation. And it found an almost perfect AUC, so 0.93, okay? So they claim that their machine learning model can predict almost perfectly whether an embryo is going to successfully implant. But hold on. So these guys over here figured out that the first guys started out with a data set of 1,773 embryos, and they added to that data set over 7,000 easy cases. So these are cases where the result was really obvious that the embryo was not going to implant. Okay, and this artificially boosted the AUC to make that model look much better than it was. Now, these in vitro fertilization clinics, they charge people thousands of dollars to use advanced AI products, okay? These are called AI add-ons that you can buy if you're in an IVF clinic. And people pay for it because they're desperate to have kids. Now, I think we should protect people from that. Okay, if the models are black box, the doctors and the patients might take the predictions at face value, and they didn't know about the cheating these guys did on the data set to get the results they got, to get this artificially high AUC. And there's no good reason for black box predictions in this domain because we have interpretable neural networks for computer vision that are accurate. Another thing I think we should protect people from is the use of face recognition. I don't want to walk into a store and have the store's camera recognize me with facial recognition. I don't want to walk down the street in Durham and have every major tech agency and the Chinese government know exactly where I am. Okay, that's legal right now, and it's really easy to implement. So except for safety situations like, boarding an aircraft or something like that, you should own your own biometric data. Right? And I was on the committee that wrote this report. All right, so you should check it out if you want to read more about the threat that it causes if we don't get it under control. And finally, you should think about who you work for and whether they share your values and how you can encourage them to do so. Now, I say this like it sounds stupid and obvious, but it's not, because I've not heard anyone speak about this before. So we're going to play a game called Is This Your Employer? Okay? So, is your employer being sued for $150 billion for amplifying hate speech against the Rohingya people in Myanmar on its platform? So we're talking about 25,000 people who are dead because, and the UN fact-finding committee said this company played a determining role in this. Okay, so this company did this. This was caused by this company. Okay, the company knew about the accounts that were causing this, but they refused to do anything about them until right after they got sued. Is this who you work for, or is this who you want to work for? Right? If you do work for them, what have you done about it? Right? And many people think, oh, misinformation, been there, done that. It's not done. Did your employer recently abandon fact-checking? Interestingly, this is the same employer as that. Okay? You would have think they learned their lesson about misinformation and its deadly consequences, but no. Was your employer declared in court to be a monopoly? Okay, monopolies harm other businesses, in this case, loads of them. Okay, and then are they being sued separately by the US government, Canada, and a 17-state coalition for being a second type of monopoly? And this is a type of monopoly that affects the way that essentially every modern company reaches its customers. Is your employer being sued because they trained facial recognition on your personal photographs? I'll give you a hint. All of these three companies are the same. Is a goal of your CEO to scan the irises of everyone on Earth and create the world's largest biometric database? Is the owner of your company supporting a pro-Nazi party? Come on, guys. Can't we do better than this? Really? Did your employer amplify misinformation before a US election? Did they cripple the NIH and NSF? Right? You know there's a kind of hiring freeze on public spending, including NSF and NIH, that pay all of our students, right? They pay all of our students' salaries. I'd love to tell people to come work in healthcare like I do, but I can't now because I don't know whether they'll be able to get paid for it. And this all happened, in my view, because the AI people working in these companies were quiet. They didn't say anything. They knew about it, but they didn't say anything. And the thing I don't get is that many AI people think it's prestigious to work in these exact companies, like it's an honor to work there. Okay, I don't personally think so, but if you do work there, you should be fighting against this stuff because you have a chance to change it, right? So we should own up to where we work and what we do there. Now, we've got a tech oligarchy in this country now, and many of us silently work for it. And we don't fix it when we work there, right? These are my own students, they're my own colleagues, and they're even my friends who do this. And I hope someday that they will realize that what they're doing is not responsible AI, and it's not what a responsible AI scientist should do. This is what responsible AI scientists should do. And it's all very simple. They should improve lives, they should save lives, and they should protect people. Thank you very much.